Okay, great. So I'll just give everyone just a few more minutes just so people can start coming in, and then we'll start. Let me get start.
So Erin, if people want to jump in late, can they do they have to go through Eventbrite?
Well, people are still registering, so if they'll get the webinar link for attendees, and then they can just join in whenever. So even if they come in half an hour late, they can still join in.
Okay.
Just letting you know, Yumi, everyone's joined in now, the audience, and we're live on Facey.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So no,
I'm just
no
gonna
nose picking. Exactly.
Yes, no nose picking or ear picking or whatever. So I'm going to give everyone just a few more minutes, like 1 or 2 more minutes, then we'll make a start.
Has anyone been invited onto Jessica Rowe's podcast yet?
I reckon we've got a high chance that someone on this panel discussion will be. Oh, Diana, I see you still waiting. Maybe you're our candidate.
I just realized I've been muted this whole time.
We've got you now.
Yeah, we got you now. All right.
Should we just stay unmuted throughout the whole session?
Totally.
Okay.
Keep unmuted.
Yeah, I'm going to like mute and switch off my camera once the session starts. So then the focus will just be on all of you guys. So I might as well. So we're going to make a start now. So hi, everybody. Thank you for attending our webinar today, hosted by Asian Australian Alliance, titled The Cultural Diversity Problem in Australian Politics. And I think this topic is quite important and also very timely. But before we start, I just want to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands we're all joining from today. For me, I am currently based overseas in Southern California. So where I am, the traditional owners are the Kumeyaay people, but I was born and raised on Darug land. And I want to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, and pay my respects to any Indigenous people joining us today. I also want to mention that please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. So for those who are attending, feel free to introduce which Indigenous land you are watching from today, but also who you are to the host and the panelists as well, and acknowledge that traditional custodians of the place where you're joining us from in the chat box. On elders being central to our Asian and other communities, and our own elders who would want us to acknowledge our First Nations, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders as a mark of respect, as a sovereign of this ancient land and the ancient culture of this land. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. We do have quite a number of admins here today from our Asian Australian Alliance team, which includes Benjamin O, Thompson Ching, Adria Lozano, Sarah Lynn, David Yao, Cassandra Ong, Yunji, Amy Kim. And I don't think if I've forgotten somebody, please apologize. I think I have introduced all the admins. So if you have any like statements, concerns, or you need any kind of resource, feel free to message any of us and the admin team. Okay, and also if you have a question that you would like to ask, so we may not be able to get through every single question. I can already see, because I'm going to know that it's going to get populated very soon. But if you do have a question, please put it into the Q&A, so therefore it's easy for us to track in terms of finding the right time and a timely time for our moderator, YUMI Stykes, to kind of ask that question. So now I'm going to do a bit of an introduction of who our host and our moderator and panelists are. So we're lucky, and it's such an honor and privilege to have our moderator today, YUMI Stykes, who's an author and broadcaster. And I don't think she needs too much introduction, because a lot of us would have seen her on radio and on TV, and her writings for quite a while, but she still looks 18 years young. So YUMI Stykes is an Asian-born mixed-race Japanese author and broadcaster. She has a body of work spanning more than 20 years and is one of the country's most trusted champions of the arts, mental health, and women's rights. And our panelists, so I'm going to just summarize their bios, but we'll send all the bios to all the attendees after. So one of the first panelists I'll introduce is Jenny LEONG, who is a New South Wales State MP for Newtown. And Jenny LEONG is a Greens member for the electorate of Newtown in the New South Wales Legislative Assembly. Jenny was elected to Parliament at the New South Wales state election in 2015. She's the first person to represent the seat of Newtown in its current form, an electorate that was described by election analyst Anthony Green as the newest, smallest, and funkiest electorate in the state. That's quite cool. Early in her career, Jenny worked for a number of years with Amnesty International as a crisis response coordinator and a campaigner in London, Hong Kong, and Sydney. And she's got a lot of things that she's done, but I'll send all that to everyone later on so you can read more about her. Jenny is a passionate activist, campaigner, feminist, and anti-racism advocate. And as far as she is aware, was the first woman of Chinese Australian heritage to be elected to the lower house of any parliament in Australia. She is happy to be corrected if this isn't the case, but looks like that it probably is the case. So thank you, Jenny. Welcome. Now,
thank you so much, Erin.
No problem. Second person I'll introduce is Tu Lee, lawyer and she also was the political candidate for Fowler. And I don't think Tu doesn't need much introduction because she has been in the news quite a bit and on a recent 7:30 report as well. So Tu is a lawyer, community worker, advocate, and organizer who grew up in southwestern Sydney. She was also the locally supported candidate for the electorate of Fowler until the Labor Party in New South Wales parachuted Christina Keneally into Fowler and essentially pushed Tu aside as a candidate. She works across Marrickville Legal Centre and Western Sydney Community Legal Centre as a solicitor, assisting COLD communities, particularly male perpetrators and victims of domestic and family violence. She is also the co-founder of the Youth Code Lab and a youth leader at the Vietnamese Buddhist Youth Association. Tu is a second-generation Australian-born woman of Vietnamese heritage with her family coming to Australia as refugees after the war. So, she lives to serve her local community and improve the lives of others. So again, there's a lot more to Tu, and I will send the rest of the bio to everybody later on. Now, the third person I will introduce is DEYI Wu, who is the president of the New South Wales Young Liberals. So DEYI Wu is the president of the New South Wales Young Liberals. She currently works for the Minister for Communications, Urban Infrastructure, Cities and the Arts, the Honourable Paul Fletcher MP. She is also currently completing her Juris Doctor at the University of Sydney. DEYI has a combined 5 years of experience working in federal and state politics. And she's also quite young, as everybody is here today. And so she's done quite a lot as well. Now, our final panelist today is Deepak Raj Gupta, who was a former ACT member for Yerrabi. Please correct me if I didn't pronounce that correctly. So Deepak Raj Gupta, age 55 years young, was the first person of Indian origin to run in the ACT election under the Australian Labor Party in 2016. Deepak was sworn in July 2019, becoming the first Indian-born person to hold the position of a member of the Legislative Assembly in the Australian Capital Territory. He was also the first member of the Legislative Assembly to be sworn in on the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu holy book. That's actually pretty awesome too, representing his Hindu faith. Having lived in Gungahlin for the past 20 years and having raised his own family there, Deepak stood firm in his capacity as an MLA for the needs of families and businesses in Gungahlin. A long and keen advocate for the local business community in Canberra, past president of the Australian Indian Business Council, ACT chapter, and a former member of the AIBC National Executive Board of Directors. Deepak is also a passionate advocate of the ACT's multicultural community and a pioneer in incubating several popular multicultural programs in the ACT. There's also a lot more about Deepak, which you guys will all learn when this is all emailed across. So we have a great panel, and again, we're so honored and appreciative of YUMI Stykes. You know, she's put up with my 100 emails and WhatsApp messages and everything like that. So
thanks, Erin.
No
All right, I'll take over from now. Thanks everybody for joining us. As you know, this is live on a Thursday night. My name's YUMI Stykes. I do this for a living, but I don't usually talk politics. So if I miss something, or if you want to ask a question, shoot one into the box on the right of your screen. We do have admin, so if you get a bit racy, it won't get to me, all right? But I want to hear your funny gags, so get those in. Big welcome to everybody. I'm on the land of the Jindabarri people. Thank you to elders past and present, and the place I'm on is called Burabi land, which is super cool. Now, I think that you can tell from the introductions that Erin made that everybody who's on this panel has, unlike Jessica Rowe, skin in the game. And the game is politics, and the skin is not white. The first person I want to talk to is Tu Lee, whose experience in the seat of Fowler is kind of what kicked off this whole conversation. She was the favourite to win the seat for the ALP until Christine Keneally was parachuted in. It was all over the news, and it got people like me thinking, what the hell? Tu Lee, is there a cultural diversity problem here in Australian politics?
Yeah, thanks, Yumi. And before I answer your question, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm dialing in from Cabral land of the Eora Nation, or the Darug Nation, sorry. And absolutely we do. There is a problem with cultural diversity. And I would say not only in Australian politics, but in a lot of other industries and institutions as well. And I think that if you ask anyone who isn't a politician, they'd probably tell you that Parliament doesn't really reflect the diversity that we have within our communities. And I think that that's really important, because I think that we need to be able to acknowledge the problem that we have with underrepresentation and a lack of diversity that we have in Australian politics, particularly when we compare it with other similar nations like the UK, Canada, or New Zealand. And I think really that's the first step. Because how do you fix a problem when you can't even identify what the problem is? And sorry, that's my dog. So clearly we have a systemic problem. Sorry about that. Clearly we have a systemic problem when comparable countries are doing a lot better than we are. And I think that the solution isn't necessarily to list the handful of politicians from diverse backgrounds so that, you know, we tick the diversity box. I think that we hear a lot of our leaders saying that we can do better. I think that saying it and actually acting upon it are two different things. And I think that we really need to, turn the rhetoric into real action. And so for me, I think the real question is, how do we fix it? And, that's starting from improving our greater diversity through collecting data and reporting on cultural diversity of political representation. I think from my knowledge, currently parties in Australia don't collect and publish data. And I think that with a lack of data, it's very difficult to convince people of the extent of the problem of cultural diversity.
Everything that you're saying so politely though too, Lee. I feel like you should be more pissed off because it was really your seat to win until this woman came in who doesn't even live in your electorate while you're there walking your dog, volunteering, being part of the local migrant law, representing local people and actually looking like the local people. I think that was one of the reasons why the news story took off, because you'd see a photo of Lee wanting to stand for Labor in the seat of Fowler and then looking so much like a part of the neighbourhood. And then to see this woman coming in and taking your spot just really, really ground the gears of many people around the country. Jenny, Leong, I want to put it to you. What was your first reaction when you heard the story about the seat of Fowler?
It's really tough, Yumi. And before I'll probably be less diplomatic than Tu about it. But I should acknowledge as well that I'm here in the heart of the electorate of Newtown on Gadigal land and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I feel really torn by weighing in on this conversation. And I want to acknowledge and thank the Asian Australian Alliance for putting this panel together, because I'm very aware that there are a lot of people that, see the Greens and Labor and our battle out for who it's at and blame me for being critical of Labor and somehow stopping, them being able to form government. And so I'm really aware of me coming out and going, yeah, I support Lee, that's amazing. And bagging out the Labor Party will actually undermine the push and the ability for a diverse woman to be able to stand up. But at the same time, if there was ever a time for us to stand a sense of solidarity across party political lines to offer an assessment of the completely appalling lack of diversity in politics, it feels like now is that moment. And I feel like from that point of view, it feels really hard, because I can give you my Greens politician answer that says the Labor Party are disappointing, they're disappointing on this, they're disappointing on that, they're disappointing on their stance on refugees and asylum seekers, on climate change and love of coal. And I can rant about this, right? And we can have a political debate where we'll all have different views. But that's not the debate I want to have right now, because I want to be having that debate with diverse people across party political lines. I don't want one party to own diversity. I don't want one party to be good at it and one party to be bad at it. I just want more people that aren't old, crusty white men sitting in the chamber with me. And I think there's a lot of other people that feel the same way. And you look at who is engaging with politics, you look at what they get away with and their outrageous behavior and the complete connection to a machine of power and interest and vested interests and at any cost and whatever it takes. And it's that's not what we want from our politics. We want people that are connected to community. We want care. We want compassion. We want a sense that people can walk up to their pollies and have a chat and say, this is what's going on. And they understand where the local street is, or what's the problem with the local neighborhood, or why this is always an issue locally. So there's two bits to that, right? One is about the diversity, but one is about having a sense of reconnecting politics back to people. And the way you do that is by having people that live locally in their community representing that community. And to me, that's not about party political lines. That's a good local MP does that as a job.
Deepak Raj, I want to go to you next, because you've had such an interesting experience as former ACT member for Yurabi in Canberra. You said recently that Asian people or people of colour shouldn't be expected to always play the part of the bridesmaid. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, thank you, Yumi. Before I start, I also like to acknowledge that I am writing from the land of Ngunnawal people, and I pay my respect to the elder past and present, and also welcome other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending today's event. So yes, as you know, the news when it came about the seat of Fowler, and it did take as a storm to all the political party. And we would have been discussing this today if there was an issue of lack of diversity, or people of diverse background are sometimes just used as bridesmaids. That all right, you're good but not good enough. And considering Lee was working on to be pre-selected, and if somebody come and say, sorry, you have to wait another 4 years, that's a long time in politics. 4 years is a long time. And when we're talking about grooming our population, our people who wants to enter politics, it is the biggest setback they can have. And this is nothing about the individual. The whole process was wrong. I think it was totally wrong to act the way it was done. It could have been handled a little bit better. I mean, we go to the takeaways, we stand on the queue. If somebody jumped the queue, we get upset, and it takes extra 5 minutes of yours. Here we are talking 4 long years that somebody has to wait. So definitely why we are always seen as a vote bank, why we are seen as, we are people, we are the most multicultural nation here in the world, but it's not really reflecting. It is not, our landscape of our community is not reflecting our parliament, and it is an issue and it has to be fixed.
Thank you, Deepak Raj. Dee, I'm going to go to you. You're president of the Young Liberals in New South Wales. Dee, Labor leader Anthony Albanese said about this whole situation, Christine Keneally's a migrant success story too. And I want to know what you thought when he said that.
I definitely laughed. When I read this in the newspaper, I think people expect these kind of stories to come from my party, which is the Liberal Party. But to see it come out of the Labor Party, you think, wow, that's really disappointing. That was my first kind of reaction to it all. I think what hasn't been discussed is that, we live in a representative democracy. The member of parliament is meant to represent the community in which they are running in. So I don't understand how in any way Albanese, Keneally, the Labor factional power, people thought that Keneally would be a great representative of Fowler. These opportunities don't come by very often in terms of you actually get someone who understands the community, reflects the community, and genuinely wants to be a representative of that community. So to kind of see this opportunity taken away from two is really disappointing. And that's coming from me, who's meant to be, bashing the Labor Party on these things. I would love to see two in Parliament. I mean, we don't have the critical mass in the first place, not in the Labor Party, not in the Liberal Party. We need to build up that critical mass. So when these opportunities come and you disregard it, then these numbers will never get built up either in the grassroots or in Parliament.
Deepak, you had an idea about why it takes people who are perhaps either born in a different country or whose parents were, takes so long for them to engage with politics. Can you share some of your thoughts around why it takes people so long?
Yes, see, one of the reasons is that a lot of political parties, they had a condition to be a member of the party, especially with Labour. Till 2014 or 15, you had to be a member of a union to be a member of Labour Party. So that put a lot of people not able to join the party. But other issues is that we are first generation of migrants in Australia. And when, as a migrant, when you come, you have other priorities for yourself, like, setting up yourself, building the foundation, starting a family, and also politics is the last thing in their mind that they have to get into because job security and supporting the family is very, very important. So that is one of the reasons we didn't see many people joining the political party. And still it is the case that not many people of diverse background are into the political party. And that is the reason that we don't see more representative, because people are not there. And when people come, they stay there for a very short period of time. And if they sometimes get disgruntled, they think they will get a ticket, they don't get a ticket, they jump ship, they go to other party and join other political party. What is important here is that, first of all, people really have to understand the politics of this land. It is very important what you're getting into. and what's your agenda and which party you want to do it. So you have to do a little bit of homework before you get into any political party, why you are there. And then you have to take participation in rank and file kind of grassroots membership. If you are not part of that group, it will be difficult for you to come just before the election and put your hand for the pre-selection, because there's a lot goes behind before you become for pre-selection, because that is the hardest part. That is the hardest part, to get pre-selected. And of course, some people are very fortunate enough that they can be parachuted to that. But anyone who's want to, and it's for the local as well. That is one factor. The other factor is that not many people talk about or don't discuss that there is a bit of a racial factor there as well. Even if you get pre-selected, you do your campaign, you do everything as per the books, but if people don't vote for you, what can you do? So I think that factor is still there, considering only 15 or 20% of people of diverse backgrounds are, eligible to vote in Australia. But again, 70 to 80% people are still Anglo-Saxon or Anglo-Celtic people who will elect you. So there's the two factors there. First, how to get pre-selected, which is a very, very hard yakka to achieve. But when you do that, are people going to vote for you? But if people don't vote for you,
can I put that to you now? Because you've had an experience, a long-standing member for the Greens in the seat of Newtown. How much has racism played a part in you getting elected or not?
It becomes a question of representative functions, and I think we talk about local representation. And for me, I was in a really unique position in that I was a local in an area which became a progressive seat. I stood for pre-selection. I had been long-term involved in the party prior to that, but didn't come from a political family at all. So got involved in the Greens and in politics and activism at university, and then slowly kind of entered into that space and stood for election. Now, when the seat of Newtown was created and I was elected, it was actually, and I want to acknowledge Daphne Lowe-Kelly is actually on this panel discussion listening in tonight, but it was people like Daphne Lowe-Kelly and others from the Chinese Australian and Asian Australian community that kind of tapped me on the shoulder and gave me a sense of like, there's a representative function beyond just your local electorate, Jenny. Like you have a role and a connection to your cultural background and to community that means that you actually step up into a different role at the same time as when you're elected. And I think, to me, I took that very seriously, and it's why I'm so supportive of the people in all political parties from diverse backgrounds that are putting their hand up to be able to be a part of our political system, because it's crucial that that happens. And I think what Deepak Raj was saying in relation to, the challenge is you have to get pre-selected and then you have to get elected. Yeah, getting into politics is hard, but why is it so much harder for people that are not white? And I think these are the questions that we have to ask around issues of systemic racism, because people all of a sudden want to position people as, oh, you're that kind of candidate, you'll tick that diversity box, or you'll bring in these kind of fundraisers and other. It's like, no, actually, people that are not white are also just legitimate political candidates too. They're not bringing in the fundraisers. They're not just there to bring in certain connections or speak to your people on polling booths that don't speak English as a first language, And our party, the Greens, are as bad as other political parties in terms of our levels of diversity. Amazingly, we have, multiple women of colour now in our federal party room and in New South Wales in terms of our political landscape. But that's not to say that this isn't a problem that infects everyone. And I'll be the first to admit that it's a party problem across the political spectrum. The challenge is, how do we make it more appealing for people to be able to participate? And part of that is something that I get really torn by, Yumi, is if I highlight the racism that I'm subjected to and the emotional effort that I have to go to be able to engage with certain political discussions because I know the racist shit that will be thrown at me. If I highlight that, I also worry that at the same time, I will discourage people from diverse backgrounds for wanting to get involved in politics. But at the same time, if I don't highlight it, I feel like I'm running a protection racket for all the evil folks that are putting that stuff out there, right? So it's a genuine challenge. The best we can offer, and I think this is, you know, where I feel like the connection of whether you call it solidarity or whether you call it, you know, networks or support networks or whatever, depending on your political persuasion, is to actually say, how do we back each other in? So how do we actually be having behind the scenes conversations to say, hang in there, we've got your back, we can see what's happening, we want this to happen and we want you to be there, stick with it, you know? And I have a role to play as an elected representative and a proud Chinese Australian woman, that I have a role to play across political spectrum to be able to encourage that behaviour.
Damn right you do. I see you there and I'm like, go Jenny Leong. And it's very encouraging to see you doing.
But then sometimes I do just sort of, and it's important to acknowledge as well. And I feel like it's, at the moment, it's really important to acknowledge, because I see, you know, in terms of DEYI and too, particularly in terms of your a kind of entry into political landscapes and your involvement, I'm also aware that it's like, it is exhausting, like it's tough, and it doesn't get easier. You basically just get better at kind of like flying a whack, you know, so I'll get on Twitter and I'll go hard for something and then I'll just step away from it, because like if I look too closely, then I'll be a sort of rocking mess in the corner at what comes back sometimes, you know. So I think it's also important to recognize that it is hard, it is really tough, but you can find amazing connections and networks to back you in and support you, and they don't have to be from the same political party.
Could I just say on that, and I know we're talking about the pre-selection, but I know you said, Yumi, that, you know, it was my seat to win. It wasn't my seat to win. All I did was put my hand up to nominate for pre-selection for the seat of Fowler. So it wasn't my seat, and I would have welcomed a challenging pre-selection process. But that's not to say that this hasn't already occurred and hasn't been occurring, as Jenny said, you know, across all political parties. It's something that's happened before. We know very well, you know, that the Prime Minister and how he got to his seat. I think everybody knows that story. So it's nothing new, and it's not unique to any particular party. I think it's just on this occasion, it's really renewed the interest and a public debate really about the broader issue here, which is representation and a lack of diversity. And I guess that's why we're here today.
Yeah. And then I just add to that, because I totally agree too. And I think that part of it is also the fact that it happened at a time when there was such a focus on Southwest Sydney and Western Sydney because of the harsher lockdown measures imposed. And many people were calling out the systemic racism associated with that. And so I think the timing, so often in politics, the timing of these things happen at a moment where everyone's already focused and concerned about what this means for our society, and a lack of connection to certain areas that are being impacted by political decisions. So I think that also happened at the same time, which then meant there was a whole lot of other people that felt really, really strongly that if there was ever a time for good local diverse representation, given what those LGAs of concern had been through, now was that time.
And it just felt a bit like not just a candidate being parachuted in, but a bit of a white saviour as well, who had no connection with who she was saving. I want to go to DE, President of Young Liberals. First of all, just is the Young Liberals not the whitest place on earth?
No, it's actually not. It's just, it's a mix of people with, you know, similar values. Obviously, what gets represented in the media is, you know, chinos and Akubras and RM Williams. But for every boy or, you know, white boy that we have a very talented female to complement that. And usually the women that stick around in the Young Libs, they are much more, have a lot more potential than just the average member. So Is it the widest place? I mean, it's reflective of, you'd be surprised. It's reflective, depending on which branch you're talking about. So the New South Wales Young Liberals have branches in 40 something different areas. So if you're looking at southwestern Sydney, no, it's definitely not white. You have a lot of different ethnicities out there. It's just depending on which area you're looking at. Obviously, if you go to the North Shore, they wear more linen there, but it's representative of the different areas.
Using that pipeline.
Sorry, I was just going to say, like, in defense of that, I think if you looked at the sort of the internal machinations of any political party, that you'd probably find them as some of the like whitest places on earth, Yumi. And that is the sad reality of politics, right? And as Tu mentioned, and as DEYI mentioned, like, you know, this is not just in politics, like this is where the decisions are made in a whole lot of other industries and professions as well, right? The lack of diversity of where the pointy end of decisions are made is a real issue.
So DEYI, can we just talk about the way that a place like the Young Liberals can act as a pipeline to get you into federal politics, much like student politics helped Jenny Leong get to the Greens to get to politics? Is there a sort of a stopgap in that pipeline where your race is going to stop you from advancing any further?
Honestly, I mean, I'm kind of the demonstration that it's not. You know, similar to Jenny, I didn't come from a political family. I really didn't understand politics prior to joining. I joined as a social reason because I transferred back to USyd. So I really didn't know anything. I literally had to go to the APH website and find out like what kind of system, what kind of parliamentary system do we have? What is the LIS? What is the, what is Labor? So you can really start from nothing. I don't think it's necessarily the party. It's the lack of critical mass of people who look and sound like me, whether that's female, whether that's Asian, whether that's someone from, the Western suburbs. I mean, even talking to my own mum when I first joined politics, she was like, "Why are you joining politics? Politics is a very dirty business. Find something stable, be a doctor, be a lawyer, that kind of occupation." That's what migrant children are pushed towards, these kind of occupations. So politics is very unstable, and it's not a career that most people who are, second generation Australians really think about as a career path, especially if you don't have the connections. You've got to build that all from scratch. So I had to build all my connections from scratch. Not saying it's impossible, but it's just harder. And if you don't have people who mentor you, men and women, or, ethnic, non-ethnic, if you don't have people mentoring you, kind of showing you the ropes of how the pre-selection processes work, how the campaigns are run, you're really disadvantaged. So it really depends on, are you willing to put up with a bit of racism to keep going, basically?
Yeah, just on that, Yumi, we have seen, and again, it depends on the different party, how they do. We had a conference, annual conference, where a lot of rules are made on the parties, how we get our membership, get along. And we created, in ACT Labour, we created Multicultural Action Group. So the whole task for that group is to attract people from diverse background, especially the second generation, who are about to take baton from us. And they are the future of this country. And I have seen there has been a lot of interest from people from diverse background who are coming onto that group and providing their feedback and want to participate, want to know exactly what they said, that you need to understand how the political parties work. And especially depends on which party. There's a factionalism is also there. You have to overcome a lot of obstacles before you said, yes, this is the right place I am in. So yes, definitely more education, more exposure, creating a platform like this will make more awareness to people. And we'll see in coming time, there'll be more and more young people will be joining from the diverse background. So the starting point has to be from the party. They have to take their initiative to start attracting people of diverse background who are part of this community. and will be a part of this community for a long, long time, because the top migrant at this stage are from 5 Asian countries. So in coming time, we'll be seeing more and more people of diverse background into our society. And I think it's the right time to start engaging them and tell them, give them mentorship, that, okay, if you want to know these are the things you need to do. Because when I came, I didn't know anything, because I just joined the party. I had no idea about the faction, how each of the faction work. And it's same thing in Liberal Party too. They have moderate and conservatives too. So that's the other thing we have to understand, and have to start teaching people that this is the whole, what's the whole gambit of the politics in Australia.
Could I jump in there and make a comment? I don't think that we should have to put up with racism. I don't think it's something that should be accepted. It needs to be challenged. And the reality is that, yes, for people of colour, particularly for women of colour, we have to work twice as hard to achieve the same results sometimes. And so I think the question really should be, how does our Australian society systemically disadvantage culturally diverse communities and individuals? And it's not just about party systems. We have to look at the judiciary, the corporate sector, academia. How many decision makers across these industries are actually from culturally diverse backgrounds? And I don't know the answer, but I'm sure there's stats out there, and we probably find that is very few. So yeah, I think that that's something that we need to challenge, and I wouldn't accept it. And I don't think we should, particularly as people of colour, and if you're diverse, if you're being treated unfairly, I think we really need to be able to challenge that.
I think we all agreed on that, but the gatekeepers are old white men, and they're not dying. Like, I'm doing everything I can with my voodoo dolls to get them to go, but they're hanging around. There's so much good healthcare here in this country. But in seriousness, we've got a good question here from Anna Newen, who said, and if you want to ask a question, we really heartily welcome them. Just pop them in the chat box and they'll come through moderators to me. How do we confront the criticism faced by many of us in many industries, so not just politics, but other places, that diverse appointments are not based on merit? There's box ticking. So you didn't actually get there because you're good and you deserve it. It's like somebody playing the race card. Dee, would you like to talk about that?
Playing the race card.
Sounds like, yeah,
I just audibly start. I just went like, oh.
You go, Jenny.
But,
you go, Jenny.
You go first. You go first, and I'll follow you.
Well, in the Liberal Party, as someone who doesn't support quotas, and I know we'll eventually get to that topic as well, I don't want people to say I'm in a certain position because I'm Asian, I'm Chinese, I'm a woman. I don't want to be boxed into those categories. Yes, I represent different aspects, of the community, but I think to play the race card will only give the opposition more fuel to undermine you when you're in that position of power, because they'll say, they'll undermine your actual efforts that got you there, basically. So I am not for playing the race card, and it won't work in the Liberal Party anyways. We don't subscribe to that.
Well, Yumi, in Labour Party, we have this affirmative action where there's a quota of 40% for male and female, men and women. So that is already there. And then 20% can be anyone. And it has worked. And you can see in Australian Parliament, we have more female representatives from ALP than any other. So quota system in that sense is working. And we have seen that if we have implied that in other places, so probably it will be a good thing in coming days to see people from diverse background.
Jenny?
I feel really uncomfortable about this, because the shift of this idea of, to go on the idea of, we don't want to play the race card or whatever. It's like, to me, the beneficiaries of identity politics are straight, old, white men from middle class and upper class backgrounds. Like, their identity has given them positions of power and authority across every aspect of our society. So if we're going to call issues with identity politics, we should be calling issues with the identity politics that has kept those, like, usually mediocre older white men in positions of power running our state, our country, and most industries forevermore, right? So where do we go from that? And I think there is an issue around the pressure on individuals to then have an issue of a quota. And it's a real challenge for how you address that in lower house seats. But we cannot, and I noticed that someone in the chat was saying it's been 50 years and there's never been someone from Vietnamese background in the Australian Parliament, you know, whatever the kind of timing is. It's like, we need to recognise that just waiting for our turn and just hoping that we will be strong enough to breach some people through the complete lack of diversity in our political system, that time is over. Like, we have waited long enough. So how do we do that? How do we do that in a way that people don't feel like they're targeted and say, oh, you just got that seat because you're a Chinese woman, you just got that seat because you've got a diversity quota? Well, the way that we do that is we make it a condition of parties taking their seats to have a level of diversity. So imagine, and this is like me pie in the sky kind of dreaming, imagine you could not have any of your members take their seats until you had a level of diversity of the people that got elected. All of a sudden, the power brokers would pay a lot more attention to the diversity and makeup of candidates overall, because you wouldn't know which ones you'd win, which ones you'd lose. But if you couldn't actually have any of your candidates take their seats in Parliament until you met basic diversity quotas, all of a sudden things would be paid attention to a lot more by those machinations within the parties. If you put it on individuals to say, oh, you get an extra boost, you get a quota, then I think there's always going to be reluctance to that for people feeling like they got something not on merit. But let us not kid ourselves, because if you are getting it on merit or not, you're failing to recognise all of the levels of systemic racism and discrimination that people have faced to get where they are. So those other people haven't got on merit, they've got it on the boosting of a system that works in their favour to get them there. And so I think it's really important that we remember that the people that don't get boosted up haven't got their merit. They've got a whole lot of advantage over the fact that the system works better for them than it does for anybody else. They didn't get there on merit.
This is an interesting question from Anna, who's a researcher. So she's interested in hearing about how the electorate is reflected in the party. It's a bit of a long idea to try and explain, but how much do party members look like what the electorate looks like in terms of a racial split, including active party members, and then taking it further, candidates? Does any party have anything that looks like the electorates at large? No one.
Well, that data is just not captured. And that's the point that I made earlier, that we're not capturing this information. So we actually don't know. And can I just say on the topic of old white men, I think it was, I'll paraphrase, but I think it was Obama that said the biggest problems that we have in the world is because old white men aren't getting out of the way. And, you know, it's not lost on me that it took an old white man, Chris Hayes, the current member of Fowler, to actually give me the leg up and this opportunity. So I think that, you know, it is really important. And we talk about, what was the phrase he used, crusty old white men, but, you know, they have a big part to play in this. And a lot of it is about, you know, not only maybe giving up a bit of your privilege, but also sharing your privilege too. And I don't know if anyone has watched the latest episode of The School That Tried to End Racism, but it's just, I just wish that I had that opportunity to speak about these issues in such a safe and frank way, because I think that would have changed a lot of my experiences growing up and as an adult.
Half of our viewers are watching The School That Tried to End Racism and the other half are watching The Squid Game, which is giving us a nice balance.
I'm watching both.
So I want to go back to you two, Lee, with a question from Anna Song. She said, at the risk of stirring the pot, do Asian Australian voters support Asian or multiculturally diverse candidates? Because she's suggesting that anecdotally, we haven't always backed our own.
Well, I think that you would never assume that any community or any type of people would vote for you just because you may share some sort of commonality. I know in my case, I'm not going to assume that just because I'm Vietnamese that everyone's going to, of Vietnamese heritage, is going to vote for me. So I think that, there are lots of reasons why people vote the way that they do. And a lot of times, and from the conversations I've had with friends, they just vote the way that their parents do, or because of their very superficial understanding of what political parties stand for, in terms of, they always tell me, oh yeah, Labor, our parents voted for Labor because we needed a lot of, assistance, but now they might be voting for the Liberals because they think that they are more aligned to their aspirational values. So I think that that's, I would never assume that anyone would vote for me purely because they're of the same heritage as me. And I think that it's just important that as someone who seeks to serve their community, you just make it very clear about what you stand for and about what you're going to fight for and the issues that are important to you and the community. So I think a big part of that is actually listening to what the community issues are and then representing those views, in Parliament. So yeah, I don't think that should be a part of it at all, having the same racial background or even being a woman. People aren't going to vote for me just because I'm a woman.
There is also a benefit, Yumi, just to say with that, there is a benefit with the ability and the importance of that diversity does allow for cross-party work to happen in our parliaments. And when parliaments work well, they often work because there is cross-party work on specific issues. And if you look at the rise in anti-Asian sentiment and anti-Chinese racism as a result of the COVID pandemic, those are the moments where having cross-party alliances to be able to respond to some of these issues that don't look like they're party political can be really, really powerful moments. But if we don't have the diversity in our parliaments across the political spectrum, those moments or those opportunities are much harder to be able to generate and have happen to change the way society is working together.
Yeah, there's a couple of things mentioned there that I want to get to. Lee talked about listening and kind of mingling with your electorate in a way that lets you receive feedback. And then Jenny, you were talking about racism and it's the reality of the rise of anti-Asian racism. Deepak, Raj, you were talking about it's a common experience for politicians where you have to go door knocking. Did you have experiences around racism when you were doing door knocking?
Yes, Yumi. In fact, I was a bit surprised because when I did campaign in 2016, I had a very good response from the whole community. And in 2020, I faced lots of racism. Slamming of the door, which is common, and it happens to other candidates as well, not only to one. But also, like, people told me, we don't like your color, or if I'm standing on a street stall, people will just walk past and just say curry mancha, go back to your country. And not only to me, to my volunteers as well, just saying, tell him that we don't like his color. We're doing phone banking, they'll say, oh, we don't vote for him. Considering where I am is a very multicultural community here in ACT. But yes, I was surprised at the amount of racism comment I received this time. Through on my Facebook and others, and some of them was really derogatory ones. It really hurt. Not only hurt you, but it affects your family as well. Because I got young teenager kids, and they used to see all this thing that my face been defaced with some good artwork in there, and people will call and leave nasty messages. So I don't know why, but I saw the racism was more on rise this time as compared to 2016. Considering I did not face that racism within the party, I've been very supportive. The party was very supportive of me, but for some reason, from the community, from the electorate, I faced a lot of racist comment this time.
Dee, can we talk to you about your experiences of racism within the Young Liberals and outside of it?
You're probably expecting me to have lots of different examples, but in my 5+ years of being in the party, within the party, from members, there's only really been 2 experiences. One was actually during the LEONG campaign, which Cornelia was trying to run there again. not representative again, but one of the campaigners on our side, she said, she first mocked the Asian accent, and then she said, these people just need to read an English newspaper once in a while. And I just remember standing there thinking, and she was talking to me and someone else, and I remember thinking, did she forget that I was Asian? Did she, you know, what is happening here? It was almost a surreal experience. So I think I said something along the lines of, you know, I'm sure they can read English, and if not, I'm sure they're very educated. I think people forget that a lot of the migrants, was in my parents' generation, they may be cleaners here or taxi drivers here, or you know, working blue collar jobs, but they were probably doctors and very well educated in their own countries, but they just haven't translated. They don't have the English skills to run for parliament. They focus their energy on raising their children, putting food on the table, putting a roof over their family's head. So it really is up to my generation and beyond to do the public service, because we have the English language skills, we have the cultural capital to understand how to navigate Australia, essentially. Yeah, I'm not sure if that answered your question, but that was one of the experiences.
Yeah, that's
sorry.
It's hard to talk about. Yeah, Deepak.
Yeah, one thing I always pose a question to people, that when the whole society accept us as doctors, you know, there are many people from Asian background, they're very good doctors. They go to their, you know, they talk about this question of life and death. When they trust them, they trust the people. We go to in the finance sector, you see there are so many Asians are there. You sit in the transport industries, there are people who take you from A to B. You have a confidence in them that yes, that person will take me to the right place. But when it comes to politics or to be in a public office, why they don't consider us to be, you know, a good lawmaker or somebody who will be performing well there as well? And we have demonstrated that whatever we do for the whole of the community, not just for the block of the section of the community, but for a whole. So that thing is really lacking when it comes to in the political system, and sometimes in the private sector as well. In boardrooms, you see, there is again quite Britannia. You don't see people of diverse background sitting on the richer board or influential board. So when there's a trust in some areas, why there is not trust in the politics? And that would really put off a lot of people coming to the politics.
Jenny, given the rise of tensions between China and Australia, do you think that it's a concern that a Chinese candidate might have split loyalties?
Yeah, it's a really sad reality. And a few years ago, you know, back in the day when we used to be able to travel to Melbourne, I went down for a thing, but there was an Asian Australian leadership summit, and the focus on one of the days was talking to under 40s, like young Asian Australian leaders. And I always take away from that really two key things. The first is a conversation that I had with some young folks who were total overachieving, amazing graduates who were now fearing that they were stuck at a certain level in their profession within the public service because their loyalties were being questioned because they had families still in mainland China. And the fact that nothing that they themselves had done indicated any need for suspicion, but that there was a genuine move about how they would be able to progress beyond a certain level in their chosen professions. And the other one, going to Deepak Raj's point, and I think, you know, is demonstrated by the very high achieving young women on this panel, is the fact that I know we will have reached equality when we don't need Asian people to have been the most crazy high achievers to succeed. Like, actually, what I was saying is that I want to be the advocate for like the mediocre young Asian person that basically just hangs out in life and doesn't achieve much. Because so actually,
you mean like, Scott Morrison, an Asian Scott Morrison?
Well, yeah, but just a little bit less shit, maybe. That's not really average, is it? But I think that, to me, that's a thing, right? So part of it feels like you've got to be, you've got to be the best at your thing to be able to have credibility or to be able to claim a space. And it's like, what we want to be doing is we actually want to say, no, we want actually just diversity across all the bits of our society and our community. We don't want it to just be like if it at this most high achieving level where we can then excel and point to this. I remember being on a horrific panel with Mark Latham from One Nation, and former Labor leader turned One Nation MP in the New South Wales Parliament. And he sort of said, oh, but like it's great because there's all these Chinese people at all our selective schools, and you go there and you could be in China. And he clearly wasn't saying it in a way that was being, encouraging, but he was pretending that he was. Like our society is so successful multiculturally because you go to these selective schools and it's full of people that look like you're in China. And this is Mark Latham talking. And, a One Nation perspective on it. And it's like, this is the thing. It creates this sense of division and resentment, but it also doesn't address the fact that we actually need equality without having to be high achievers. Trying to be a high achiever as well is actually quite exhausting. And I think, it's important for us to send that message. I know there's probably lots of young people that are feeling disillusioned by politics listening in. And I would say, like, you don't have to be a high achiever to expect not to have people be racist to you. Like, actually, you can just expect people not to be racist to you, even if you're a bit mediocre. If you want to be stoned and sitting on your couch, playing games on whatever is the latest, like, Nintendo or Switch or whatever, that's fine. You still don't deserve people to be racist to you. And that's really important message to be able to send out. Can I also just make one really random point that I just discovered about Christina Keneally? We all now have a direct connection because Christina Keneally used to represent the seat that covered parts of the old seat of Newtown before it was created. So we're talking Fowler, we're talking state parliament covering Redfern, and we're talking Bennelong. So obviously she's quite enthusiastic about moving around where she can get the seat that she needs.
Question for Tuli. So this comes from Lisa, but also is echoed by Maylay Hunt. It's about people of colour being supported by the main political parties. We've witnessed that the pre-selection process can disfavour culturally diverse candidates, says Lisa. Do you still have faith in the major political parties, or should we abandon those major parties?
Well, I think that me personally, I joined the Labor Party when I was back in uni, and I joined because my values I found aligned with the values of the Labor Party. And I think that obviously, this situation and the experience I had isn't great, but as I said, it's an internal party factional matter. And the fact that, it became quite public was quite unique. And I think that was potentially because of, the missed opportunity that there was to have greater representation in Parliament. But I think that I'm quite optimistic about the future. I'm quite optimistic about the change. And I do believe that we're going to see change in our generation. And I think that change, whilst it's inevitable, it takes time. It takes organising, it takes, vision for what could be. And I think that we need to keep putting the pressure for change. And that comes from, not only outside, but also from within.
So getting rid of our imposter syndrome a bit, is that what you mean by that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's a very common experience where you have very limiting beliefs because you don't see people that look like you, in decision-making positions. And when you don't see it, you can't imagine yourself being in these positions. So I'd like to think that if I ever had the opportunity to be a decision maker or even be successful, that I don't want to be the person that, slams the door behind me and locks the key and throws away the key. I would want to knock the whole door down, and heck, I'd knock the whole building down if it means that it gives other people an opportunity and equal access. And, I think for those who want to go, we actually could give them a go.
Daniel's asked a pretty interesting question, and I'm going to put it to all 4 panel members. With all four panelists being deeply involved in electoral politics at party level, could you let the audience know what specifically each of you have done to address the racism issue within your own parties? Could I start with you, Deepak?
Yes, Yumi, as I mentioned, we had a conference earlier this year in July, and this is where we created, and I supported the motion to create a multicultural action group. And this is where we have to attract people who wants to come into the politics and give them a kind of a training to how to groom them into the role. And of course, as there's no room for racism, and we make it very clear, in our party, we have an engagement officer, a multicultural engagement officer. If you have any issue of racism, you should address it. So racism will never go. It has not happened first time, and it's not the last time. It will continue to go. But something has to come within ourselves as well. How do we tackle that? One thing with the people from diverse background is sometimes they settle for less, and they should be doing that. They should really stand up. And I must say hats off to Lee. She's really standing up with all this media attention. And unless we don't stand up and bring that issue, like I'm always saying that I worked so hard. I mean, after my election review, the panel, they said, Deepak, we can't find anything to tell you this was the area you have to improve. I did not leave any stone unturned. But at the end of the day, if people don't vote for you, what can you do? So that is very important, that we have to eliminate that racism factor from the politics, and it has to come from the top end. They have to really, really work towards that to make sure that there's no racism in the party, and they have to demonstrate as well. It's not just a lip service, but have to demonstrate as well how we eliminate racism, not in politics, but also in the other private business as well. So we are tackling that way. We are addressing the issue. He's saying, come and talk to us about it, and we are supporting the candidates or future candidate who wants to be part of the party.
Jenny Leong, what are you doing in your party to address racism?
Yeah, thanks. I might start by going back to your other, I feel like I skirted over the China-Australia relations stuff and got caught up in COVID stuff. But so I might use that as the first example, is that I'm making it really, really clear that our party needs to take a strong stance when it comes to the warmongering and the whipping up of anti-Chinese sentiment that is linked to a militarization and a desire to spend more money on submarines and to cause a really devastating talk of destruction and war within our party. And I feel like that is a nerve-wracking space for some people, because of the fact that very quickly I'll be called a apologist for the CCP. I'll be told to go back to where I came from, all of those things. But I feel like it's incumbent on me to push our party in a way to have a stronger and stronger position when it comes to China-Australia relations that puts peace first and at the heart of it, and doesn't shy away from calling out these issues in a way that protects not just myself, but other Chinese Australians and Asian Australians from wanting to speak out on these issues. And so I think that's one part of that, and I think it's essential that we keep doing that. I'm also forcing myself to engage in discussions and debates around those issues, because, to be honest, I am really, really sick of academic experts, all of whom are older white men, talking about China and China relations. And I think that we need to challenge that and engage with that process so there is more diversity in that debate. The other two things that I think that I do on a regular basis, and I wish that I was able to do it more, is try and make sure that there is a connection and a support for people that join the party that are from diverse backgrounds, so that they can reach out and support. I don't think I've always done that well. It is a really tough thing to have to deal with the emotional efforts of being a diverse person, often the only non-white person in a room, and at the same time also be a support. But I do try and do that, and I've tried to create ways to do that more. And then the final thing is, I'm going to be a bit cheeky and do a plug, is that we are currently recruiting for a role in our electorate office. And part of the way that you get more people involved in party politics and more involved in politics generally is that they get a job as a staffer with an MP, to be able to see how that works, and that breaks down those things. So I'm going to put the link in the chat, and I'm going to encourage people that are not white to apply for that job.
Fantastic. Lee, can I get you to answer that question as well, which was also sort of asked by Shilpa Raj Kumar, addressing racism in your own party?
Well, I'm currently working with a group of people across the party in New South Wales on prioritising, ensuring that as a party we do prioritise cultural diversity and see it as an issue, identifying it as an issue and making it a priority. So it's something that we're working on, and we've been engaging with different representatives as well as different stakeholders within the party to really push for this. And I think that we've got momentum for it now. I'd probably echo what Jenny had said too in regards to having those opportunities to engage, not just in Young Labor or Young Liberal, or I never actually was involved in Young Labor, even though I joined in uni. I was involved in many other organizations and student clubs at the time, but I actually got more involved in politics because of my experience working for a member as an electorate officer and also as a campaign manager. So that's when I really had that strong engagement. And I think a big part of that too is how we engage locally, and community engagement is so important and something that all parties probably need to pay more attention, because there's such a disconnect between, and the reason why we have this problem is that our parties or our parliament doesn't reflect the diversity within our communities, is because oftentimes our decision makers are so far removed from the grassroots level, from what's really happening on the ground. And I think that that's something that as a party that we're working towards as well.
They so are so removed. DEYI, I'm going to get to you in a second. Just while we're talking to you about this too, Lee, Diana Nguyen and Katrina both want to know if the New South Wales Labor Party have plans for you. Like, are they going to try and rehabilitate their kind of treatment of you?
Well, it's been only 3 weeks. It's been a very long 3 weeks. I know you always hear like one day in politics is really long. I mean, it's been 3 weeks and it feels like a lifetime. And I have to say, from this experience, I've grown a lot. I've learned a lot about myself, and I've had to react quite a bit. I'd like to tend to be at the forefront of these things, but I just had no opportunity to do that. And so it's been quite overwhelming. But I think for me personally, I like to take my time to make important life decisions. I don't think you would make a decision very lightly after 3 weeks of going through what I went through. So at this stage, I'm not entirely sure what my next steps will be, but I know that I would make a very careful and informed decision.
Thank you. DEYI Wu, just back to Daniel's original question about what you're doing or have done to directly address racism in your own party.
Yeah, so so my predecessor was also Asian, Sinead Torres, he was Filipino. So even in the Young Liberals, you can see that shift where previously the board of presidents were all Anglo names. Now it really is based on how hard you work. So there is a shift there, but I think my role within the Liberal Party is different to Jenny and different to Tu's, different to Deepak's. There's always going to be racist people within society. I don't know if you can actually ever eradicate racism, but you can make people more accountable for their actions. So you guys are doing things externally, putting pressure on, the racist people externally. Certainly there are racist people within my party, and I'm doing that internally. I think if you do that together, that works much better than just outside, shouting them down. Internally, there's been instances where, because they know who I am, they know my personality, if I call them out, they're more likely to understand where I'm coming from and not, or even if me being around them, they will think, oh, hang on a minute, before I make that generalization or before I make that racist comment, I know Dee and I know that she's not like that. So it filters their thoughts before they let it out, basically. So applying that internal pressure is very important to me. I mean, it's not only the cultural diversity issue, but also women, sticking around. When I first joined, there were very few women in the room, even less Asian women. So just sticking around and the fact that now we have the first Asian woman as young Liberal president, it shows all my younger female members that they can get here too. And I'm always open to telling them exactly, you know, what you need to do to get here. But yeah, like True said earlier, it's very hard to aim for something when you don't even see it. So just by sticking around, building the critical mass, mentoring people who look and sound like you, who don't have that political capital that their parents may have given to them, that's very important. And also holding more events in areas that are, you know, not blue ribbon, basically. Yeah.
It sounds
So
so
Yumi,
exhausting.
just to add quickly on that, I think one thing is very important in this message to all the sitting parliamentarians and MLAs, that they should also try to hire the staff working in the parliament of diverse background. If you see in Australian Parliament, I'm not sure about the New South Wales Parliament, they are mostly people of Anglo-Saxon. You hardly see anyone from a diverse background they're working, maybe one or two. So that's another culture we have to bring in to our political system, to give exposure to the people, how the parliament works, and give that exposure. And all these issues of racism will be addressed there, because then you're working in a multicultural environment, and you will see that it will help reducing those issues of racism if we have the workforce, a diverse workforce as well in the Parliament House and into the assembly offices.
I'm trying to distill the thoughts of our panelists today. And one of the things that's coming through, I think, from everybody is that being Asian in politics means there's a pressure to prove your credentials repeatedly. So doing it once, getting in and being competent at your job and just nailing that is often not enough. So what we're seeing is people who really have to repeatedly hit it out of the park. Would you agree with that, Jenny?
Yeah, it's also something, and I think at different stages in my life, you know, I use William Yang's quote quite often. He talks about coming out he's saying that he came out as an Asian Australian much later in life. And for me, that was the case, right? When I was the sad reality of things is that when I was growing up in Adelaide, my biggest wish in the world was to have blonde hair and blue eyes and just fit in like everybody else. And I didn't like the attention that I got from, you know, young Asian teenage boys, and it made me feel uncomfortable. And I just wished that I could just make what I look like as different go away, you know. And I know that I'm not the only one in that situation that is an Australian born Asian child. And that's really shit, and it's really sad. And so part of me is now kind of going, you know, how do you find the balance between that level of, you know, internalized racism and really, really problematic approach to yourself versus, you know, now if you saw me on Twitter having a rant about anything, like I'll be calling out everyone and everything at every moment, you know. But going to DEYI's point, and I think this is true, I also, a lot of the time, are doing that direct work inside our party, having those quiet conversations or making not so quiet conversations, depending on where internally, right? And I think part of it is finding a way to do all of that work at once, right? And it's not easy. And so it does mean you're constantly doing it. I wish that I didn't feel like sitting in the New South Wales Parliament and they start banging on about China and someone makes some racist remark and then calls someone, you know, make some joke about something, and then they start saying, I wish I wasn't the one that I felt like had the sole responsibility to stand up and call that out. Like, I wish there was a lot more people so I could just like focus on what I was doing and not have to do it. But it feels like, well, if I don't do it, no one's going to do it. And so then I get seen as the one, oh, she's always going on about race. She's always going on about gender. Well, it's like, partly that's because nobody else is standing up and saying this. You all heard what that person just said. It's clearly racist. Someone else could have a go. Don't all just look to me to once again have to stand up and say it, you know. And so I think this is the challenge between not wanting to look like you're constantly being the one that talks about the issue versus the fact that if no one else says it, then you can't just sit there because it feels like you have a responsibility to represent a community that is not represented because our parliaments are so lacking in diversity.
I have to say it's not that dissimilar in television and radio, Jenny.
Totally. And I just noticed in the chat, Yumi, there's now a discussion about having a similar level of discussion about diversity in the media as the next panel discussion.
Yeah, and what you find is if you're the one that continuously brings it up, you don't get hired anymore.
Yeah.
Because you're a troublemaker.
Yeah.
Proving our credentials repeatedly, that's where we're at. I think as a closing idea, could we just see a show of hands, who is for quotas and who is against? Who is for quotas and the rest are not? All right, well, I'm going to put it to you one by one, just as a way of saying goodbye to this discussion. What's the one thing that you would do to attract more diverse candidates to your party? Can we start with you, Deepak?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, one of the things I've also started here in ACT is Subcontinent Friends of Labour. And this basically is a new generation people to, before they go to the party, they have a bit of a taste it's like a pre-nursery kind of thing. So that has also done a lot because we have seen people, they're showing interest, they're understanding the politics, and they're taking more interest into the politics. So I've started recruiting a lot of young people of diverse background who are part of this group, and they are learning the ropes, how to get into politics, understand it. They were there with me in my campaign. They also assist other people on the campaign. It's not that that's the only thing they do, just campaigning for their candidate, but also they are getting what it is to be a politician in Australia, what it takes to be getting into politics, how to understand what are the factional issues in the parties, and how you get yourself pre-selected. So they're just getting those ones, and I think in coming time, the second generation, in 10, 15 years time, we'll see more representation, more diverse parliament if we keep grooming and nurturing our coming generation and tell them our experience, a good experience. I'm not saying it was a bad experience, but there are some good experience as well. There's some good people in the community too. So it's not all that bad, but of course, yes, diversity is lacking and we have to start from somewhere. And this is what I have started, is to recruiting people from different background to understand the politics before they enter into the politics.
Thank you, Deepak, and thanks for joining us today. Jenny Leong, what's one thing?
Yeah, I'm going to be slightly controversial, which is probably not surprising for me. I think we're all doing enough. I think it's all the white folks that need to do more. Like, we're doing the heavy lifting, right? We are doing what we can do in the way that we do it. But actually, the responsibility for making our political parties and our democracy and our parliaments more diverse sits with the people that are sitting in there now, looking around going, oh yeah, this is completely normal. It's not normal. It's not okay. And we notice it now with gender, right? We notice it. If there's a panel of like 5 men on the panel, people call it out straight away. But if you have a panel of 5 people that are all white, it's like, ooh, are you supposed to say it? Or maybe we won't say it. Like, if you look at the makeup of our parliaments, that's the problem. And whose responsibility is it to take that action? Yes, we're all doing enough. Like, the people on this call, you are doing so much already. Like, you're amazing, you're doing your thing, like, you're going hard. What we need is the people that aren't on this call to be doing more. And I think the challenge is how we put the challenge to those folks to actually step aside, as Tu said, to step aside and share the power and the privilege to actually fix the problem.
Tu, can we go to you now?
Sure. A friend of mine actually taught me something very recently, and that was to view my being Asian as a superpower. And I think that, being a hyphenated Aussie, being a Vietnamese Australian, like, I'm super proud of that. And I'm just sorry that it's taken me so long to acknowledge that and to feel that. I think to end on a more positive note, I think we all acknowledge and we know that, we're a very diverse and very multicultural nation, and we should celebrate that, yes. But I don't think it ends there. I think that we should strive to be a more inclusive and fairer society as well. And I think we all want to live, in a country that's that is more cohesive and more inclusive, and we're part of that solution. You know, people of color, Asian Australians, we're part of that solution too. And I think that all we want as community members, as individuals, is that for everyone to feel valued and that there is respect and trust in our institutions, and we need to start rebuilding that.
That would be so good, wouldn't it? What an inspiring idea. Thank you so much, to Lee. Can we go to you, DEYI? What's the one thing that you would do?
So the Young Liberals are currently working on something called the candidates list, which the UK Conservative government, they have. And this is together with the former WILD President Sinead Torres. Basically, we're looking at diversity, not just cultural diversity, but diversity including, you know, people with different socioeconomic backgrounds, people with different work experiences, people from different geographic areas. We want true diversity and not just fake diversity, which is, you know, just the male or female kind of dichotomy debate that we always get stuck in. And now it's kind of cultural diversity, but we want true diversity within our pre-selection processes. So how do we get people who may not, you know, come from the political background, have not done the numbers, have not joined a local branch, how do they understand the pre-selection process and come into it with some expertise rather than it purely being numbers and branch stacking and factions. So that's what we're looking at, and we're currently in consultation, and we're going to submit it to our state council, which is the senior party. Yeah, that's basically reform at an institutional level.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you for the Asian Alliance for putting this together tonight. Jenny Leong, Tu Lee, DE Wu, and Deepak Rajgupta. You've all been really, really generous with your time. And everybody who asked questions, sorry if we didn't get to yours. We really appreciate your input. Have a great night. We'll see you all around.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you so much, Yumi.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Bye. Thank you everyone for attending.